Awesome. So thank you, Alicia, so much for taking the time to meet with me today. I've been following your career avidly on social media, and I'm really excited that you and I are now working together on a couple of different projects. And I want to start off by saying how much I admire and respect the work that you're doing. One of the reasons why I really wanted to get in touch and just kind of pick apart some of the issues that we're both working on is because you bring a very unique perspective. From what I see you putting out on social media, these issues of diversity and inclusion, and to some extent design, I think as well, is a really critical area of concern for you as both an academic and I believe also as just a human being and living in today's world. One of the topics that we just started talking about right off the bat was this issue of imposter syndrome. And I hear this from so many of my colleagues, what it is to cope with imposter syndrome. So maybe we could go back in time a little bit. And when did you first hear about this concept, imposter syndrome, and how do you kind of interpret it?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me and for your kind words about my work. It's often a bit of a challenge to share your voice out there, but I also feel like it is important for me to be out there and to share my views, because the more diverse the online space is, the better for all of us. And in terms of the imposter syndrome, I don't really remember the exact time that I started using that term in my life, but I think it was around the time when I actually entered academia as a PhD student. And you just you don't have a name for it. And then suddenly someone identifies it as an imposter syndrome, and you just kind of internalize it, and it stays with you for a number of years. And it's still around. And it's really interesting when I look back at my time before academia. I was sometimes feeling that I'm not in the right place, but most of the time, because my projects were aligned with my values, I never experienced that before, So, and it was mainly around, co-design, co-creation, participatory work. So it wasn't entirely my own. And then when your academic research becomes truly your own and you're solely responsible for it, that's when it kicks in. That's where you feel that it's just not good enough.
I got you. I wonder what is that feeling like that when you kind of have that recognition, that realization that imposter syndrome is part of your working life, your working experience. How does that present itself in your life?
Yeah, I know it's there at the back of my mind, and it's definitely a collection of voices that I've heard over the last several years in academia. So I'm open to having discussions around my work, and the criticism is obviously part of the experience. But there have been, some people criticizing me in a certain way that it stays with you for a long time. And I guess it's a mixture of, so I had someone once telling me that I'm, as an early academic researcher, I shouldn't really have an opinion, because I'm too young to actually have an opinion. So it kind of stayed with me for a while. And I guess the imposter syndrome is really a collection of these different voices that I've heard. And it's just a mixture of things. And I think when it comes down to not being good enough, I think it also comes down to my experience of being a migrant for 15 years, So you enter another country and you're just never good enough. And because that happened in the UK, and I went through Brexit and, being blamed for healthcare crisis. And so it is within academia, but it's also kind of more complex than that, I guess. And the way it manifests itself, I would say it just shows up unexpectedly. And I guess I think the biggest problem for me is when people actually do appreciate my work and say they find it useful. And that's when I really don't know what to say, because I always feel like I talk a lot about it and I put it out there, but I'm not sure if that's an actual value. That the fact that I'm loud, does that add a value to my research? So it's, in a sense, my coping mechanism is to like be in your face with the work that I'm doing. But I do question that often as a strategy, or I question the value of the actual work. I know there are better researchers out there who are probably not that loud. And so,
Wow, I really appreciate you being so just authentic and honest in this experience, because when I hear what you're saying, interpreting through my own lens of privilege and bias and everything else, it sounds so, it's just so disconnected from my experience and from my reality. And so for you to say something like, it's when people compliment you that you start to doubt yourself the most, that it just, I don't know, I feel a lot of empathy for you right now. So I can't imagine what that must be like, but I see the struggle. And especially that multi-layered aspect of being a migrant and being a researcher. I think that's a really important consideration. I'm wondering if you could go back then and talk to me about how you entered let's start with academia. How did you enter academia? What was that experience like?
Yeah, I mean, I was mainly a bit of an activist and a practitioner. So while I was doing my undergrad in 2010, I think, I was involved in like community projects around Scotland, and I kind of learned about this attitude, the idea of participatory filmmaking, participatory arts for social change. So that kind of defined me for a number of years, and I worked alongside other practitioners, lots of different communities. I set up my own sort of digital literacy collective called Digital Bees, where I kind of experimented with different methodologies myself. So most of it was just pretty much all about doing what I loved and just trying and experimenting with new things, not necessarily linking it to theory, So it was learning from people, and just kind of being that weird person that comes into the community and, just comes up with like experimental work and just plays around with it. So that was me for a number of years. And then I realized that, and so at some point, the key emphasis of my work was on young people. So it's primarily working with young people and kind of seeing how digital technologies influence their lives and how can they possibly take the ownership of the technologies themselves. And so I realized that there's a bit of an issue with the work that I've been doing, and a bit of the issue with the organizations that I work, in a sense that we were imposing the idea of impact on the young people and telling that they are always empowered through digital technologies, and that Facebook likes are equal participation, and so there was quite a lot of issues there, and people actually not knowing what impact is. And that's when I realized that this is a big issue. And so I applied to Napier University in Edinburgh with that kind of project, actually questioning the value of youth digital participation and looking at the narratives that are in Scotland around how we defined the value. So that's how I entered academia.
That's absolutely fascinating. I love just hearing your reflection about that journey and even the kind of awareness you have of putting your agenda onto the agendas of the people who are participating in your work. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that. How did that realization come about? What was the sort of mechanisms that were behind it? Because I fear that a lot of academics have trouble jumping that hurdle of, this is what I want to research. This is what the people are telling me. If that doesn't connect, then I win. I trump the concerns of the community. So I would like to hear about how that even came.
Yeah, I think I should say a huge thank you to all the communities that I worked with, because I really did learn from them a lot about, the ideas that I bring into certain areas. And I remember years ago when I was first working on like this participatory filmmaking project, and I ended up in one of areas of Edinburgh, which had quite a lot of issues, So many researchers would go there and research poverty and, things like that. And then they would go away and kind of, and I wasn't a researcher at the time, but I remember arriving in this community center, and the lady that worked with me, she said, look, you can come in, but you have to contribute to this community. You can't just pop in, do this poverty experience, and then take it away. The community has to contribute from this project. So back then, I realized, okay, this is the key aspect of my work, and this is what I'm going to be doing. So then I've done it, and I've done it with other people who were community educational experts. So they were the researchers around me, and I was just kind of the tool, to kind of facilitate these workshops. But then there was a big push, I think, in around like 2014, and the word participation became this trendy big thing that we had to include in every single project. So the 3 words like empowerment, participation, provision, I just remember these words being used in Scotland, and at the time it was the national strategy for youth, which was amazing, but definitely these 3 words were the driving force for it. And I just saw it kind of being used, just adding a label to everything. So you kind of assume that everything is participatory. And I'm probably equally blamed for that. It could be blamed for that, because there are projects that I've done that I might have called participatory, but they weren't truly participatory. So then when I went to do my PhD, I kind of learned a lot about the regimes of participation and how the idea of participation has been imposed for a number of years in global development, and how it's in kind of it's kind of being linked to all areas of life, design, participatory design thinking, how we forget to consider its limitations, and how sometimes it isn't the best approach to actually assume that everybody knows what's best for them, and so all of these dynamics there, and I now know, and I am quite aware of my limitations in terms of participatory practice. And I'm quite skeptical about participatory practice now. In general, but I guess that's what you do when you become an academic. You just, have that other point of view. But there's lots of well-meaning projects, and they're amazing. And I work with these projects still sometimes as a digital youth worker. But I guess I can see its limitations now.
It's such a refreshing and insightful view on this issue, because I see this exactly what you're saying, that participation is sometimes used as like a panacea. It's just like, oh, we'll fix it with just participation. If we use participation, then suddenly magically everything will be resolved. Mm-hmm. But your idea is refreshing, because I've never thought of it in those terms, that it can actually be kind of us putting an agenda on the communities that we're trying to work with, rather than truly collaborating with them to understand and identify what are the mechanisms for creating input and dialogue and all these other aspects. But maybe you could talk a little bit more about that. I'd love to hear, what do you see as the major challenges around participation? What are the drawbacks? What are some of the trade-offs that maybe you've had to?
One of the things that I had to do, the key thing for me was to actually acknowledge that there is not, it isn't in my power always to make the process, fully meaningful. So even back when I was doing just practice, like participatory practice, I always had these big visions at the beginning, and then I realized that projects, they don't fail, but they don't go according to plan, of course. And there is always an element of, positive and negative impact, or no impact whatsoever. And this is something that I've learned through my PhD, is that we often assume that participation only leads to positive impact. And this is what we report in reports, and impact is always positive. And it kind of goes into these, we talk about participation as a democratic tool, and, kind of changing the power hierarchies. But in a sense, it's still with this neoliberal cycle where it has to bring value to the community. It has to bring value, and you have to datafy it. So at the end of the project, you need to have proof that it worked, and that, so it's to me, maybe acknowledging that and realizing that we are in this sort of, that in a sense, sometimes it is performative. So we are doing certain things so they appear participatory, and then we report the impact that is necessary to be reported, right? Because this is how we sustain funding long term. So one of the things that I've been trying to do is kind of look out for my own assumptions around that, and not imposing the idea of, so especially in the youth practice, it feels like everybody has to be empowered and they have to go through a big change, and maybe understanding that not everybody has to be changed. Some people don't want to be empowered. Not everybody has to be empowered. The experience could just be just an experience, and it's not about liking it or not liking it, but actually understanding that, the impact itself can be very complex. And so for me, maybe that was a big one, the realization that we are in a sense in this power structure. And I know it's impossible very often to do something outside of this power structure. So even if I encourage participants to say, what did you not like? Just be honest, and let's talk about it through the process, through the participatory process, so not just at the end, but actually at the beginning, in the middle, and just having these honest conversations, right, where they feel also safe to say those things, because very often they don't feel safe and they feel co-responsible for the funding. So they have to say that they are empowered, right? So, maybe I don't have a set of tools or tips that we should be using, but I think maybe just knowing that we are in this participatory power structure, just being aware of that, I guess it kind of gives you a fresh perspective.
I love it. I love it. It's and I think that is a tool to be aware of those power dynamics. And I think often we go into these spaces and we're not aware of those power dynamics. And, we imagine that we're doing the right thing just by creating a space. But, not to use a very overused word these days, but if it's not an inclusive space or an inclusively designed space where people do feel safe and secure in contributing ideas and, just being part of that discussion and dialogue, then it all falls apart. It just becomes, I can't remember how you put it, but just.
Yes. And it seems to me, sorry. It seems to me that sometimes it just, there is this, the savior complex where you are, where you are bring about change. And sometimes when I look back at all of my experiences in Scotland, I think that was what defined me. I felt that I had a purpose, that I was actually bringing some value into the community because, I was doing the social change work. And so only now I'm seeing it as a role that I took on because, I maybe didn't have the courage to do the work that I really wanted to do, or that, I appreciated it and it was amazing, but it definitely added value to my life as a migrant because I was the good migrant. I was I was contributing, so there is an element of that, hiding behind the participatory work.
Yeah, I think.
And not taking the full responsibility for failure, So I used to do that all the time.
Yeah. It's really remarkable, and I love hearing you talk about these things because it's reflected in my own journey as well. And so you get into this issue of questioning your own assumptions and trying to remain, if I could put it in my own words, a kind of humble or some sense of humility when you're going into these spaces. And not just expecting that your presence brings value, but that your presence can actually detract from that value, and that you need to be super, super cognizant of all the issues that we've already discussed, these power imbalances and everything else. I find it a struggle to maintain that level of kind of awareness. I'm wondering what you've done in your past to kind of hold yourself accountable, I guess, to the needs of the community without becoming discouraged or without making it about yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, perhaps one of the things that I tried was to kind of have that initial conversation about the fact that I'm not going to pretend that we're going to fix an issue with this project. We are not going to take it to the city council and then we're going to achieve something. It really isn't about that. And I am only here to kind of be the tool, so I'm only here to facilitate the project, but in no way I can take it forward so it's a big success. And perhaps one of the things that I would always say, and I don't know if it would work, it's just to say that I'm there to, that I don't have the expertise that they might have, and I'm there to learn from them. But you know what? Actually, when I think about it now, I haven't done it in such a long time where I was fully responsible for a full project. And the work that I do just now is around mainly research, and I just trying to think, but I don't remember my. I did projects, but they weren't full-on participatory projects for a number of months, or but I guess maybe being brutal about the things that don't work, and that maybe just kind of acknowledging that things didn't work, and allowing things to fail. And I know there's this big agenda of like, don't be afraid to fail and things like that, but truly not turning every story of failure into a success story, or just as you do during a job interview about your weaknesses. You say, oh, I've got this weakness, but so maybe I tried to do that and be realistic. And I think there was an element of like, I'm Eastern European, so it's easier for me to be like critical, and and maybe I didn't have for a long time this Britishness in me, so I would be very direct, and I would really talk about the things the way I thought they were, and maybe after a number of years and when I went to academia, I kind of had internalized this other role where I just need to keep my views balanced. And I don't think this is answering your question, but returning to the community. Yeah, I just wanted to say that returning to the community with those findings, to me, is very important. So perhaps with my PhD, all the way through, it was participatory. And at the end, I really wanted to make sure that I turn it into something accessible. So infographics, tools that they can use. I went back to the community. I organized a meeting between policymakers. And, so I tried my best to go out there and to make this issue visible. And so the people that participated in my research, that their voices could be heard. And obviously, it happened to some extent, but not how I wanted it to be. But this is the least I could do, is actually to return to the community, check if they agree with it, and turn it into an accessible format, right? So it isn't just a journal article. That's why I do it. That's what I do in academia, actually. Yes, that's right. So, yeah.
But that's then perfect, because one of the things I admire about you most is your ability to communicate science, and there's no clear evidence than your work on social media that has shown to me the power of being able to just communicate clearly, understandably, and in a way that evokes kind of not just that's interesting, but an actual emotional response to what you've done and what you've, the expectations that you're challenging, the kind of conventions that you're looking at replacing with better models and better ways of doing things. So I know that's super abstract, and I want to go into your history as a practitioner prior to when you went into academia, because I think this is a really important part of your trajectory and a really important part of why you are where you are now. And so I'd love to hear you reflect on what value have you gotten out of the work that you did as an activist and as a practitioner prior to coming into academia. How has that created value for you in the academic?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely something that I have just mentioned. The fact that when I do work with the community, I have to return to the community and turn something so they benefit from it, And even if it isn't a huge change, there has to be some sort of way for me to return to them and say thank you, and actually turn the data into something that they could use themselves. So taking it back is definitely a big one, because this is what you do in participatory practice in community settings. You always have to return to your participants and make sure that they have a more or less an understanding of what the outcome is and if it failed or not, the project. So I guess that respect towards the participants, their time, the way they receive my messages. I want them to enjoy the experience. So when I create all of these research projects, I want them to be visual. I want them to kind of feel that they're part of it, and I know there's an element of branding to it, but it also seems to me that we are so exhausted with the amount of information that is out there, and it's just nice to actually spend time and create something that might be enjoyable or nice to look at and consistent through the project. So for me, that language, the communication with the participants, ensuring that they feel valued, just like in the participatory practice, I think that's something that I've been trying to do in my work as an academic. And I know that in many ways I've been a bit of a weirdo, with all my colorful slides, or turning data into ghosts, or just really pushing with the storytelling agenda to the point that many times it has been embarrassing. And but I guess being embarrassing is also a way to make an impact, or so people remember your story. So that's definitely what I've learned in the community setting, and that's what I'm using in my work as well as an academic.
And I love this idea of embarrassment being the disruptive element to the kind of work and the impact that you want to make. I think that's brilliant.
Well,
yeah. So I want to ask a follow-up question. So I asked you, what value did you get out of this previous experience as a practitioner? I want to flip this around a little bit and ask you, what value in what ways did the academic community value that experience? So looking at it from the academic community side of things, do you think that they found value, your peers, your colleagues, people who you're working with, or even people who are maybe further along in their careers, do you think they saw that experience as valuable in the work that you're doing? You call yourself a weirdo, and so I'm wondering is there an element of that where it's like they're just not sure what this strange thing is, not what I'm used to in research. Just wondering if you.
Yeah, I think I've received some good feedback in the past, and as a PhD student, I had been kind of, just really removed from the community setting, digital communication setting, and just like put into academia. So I used whatever I could to make it all colorful. And I think my supervisors were very supportive, my colleagues were very supportive, and sometimes they would ask me for opinions where they were doing their work in a colorful way. And I think maybe I received good feedback, but it's not up to me to say what impact it had. But definitely there was good comments out there, and like I said previously, it's always strange to hear that, because you want it to make an impact and you want people to enjoy it. But when they do say that they enjoy it or that they like the graphics, it's always a bit like, but did they really like the graphics, or are they just saying because they feel like this is the right thing to say? But I'm sure they did like it because I like them too. So it's a very mind is a difficult thing to handle. So.
I think a lot of science communicators face this, is the feeling of like, are we infantilizing our findings? Are we putting it in a package that is oversimplifying things, or that insecurity that comes with like a very complex topic, really complex issue with a lot of nuances, and having to find a way of packaging that into like 280 characters. And then you're sitting there thinking like, how do I do that? What is your approach like? How do you manage?
Yeah, I don't know. It comes to me whenever I'm making a graphic. And I think I always try to turn my analysis into a mind map. I worked quite a lot of with like hand drawings, and that's the way I think. So I always just try to use that to kind of as a basis for the graphics that I'm doing. And I think it might not be in line with what some academics want me to do, but I also feel that I have this responsibility to my PhD was funded by the taxpayers' money in Scotland. I take the data from the public. I go into the public. They commit their time to participate in my work, and the idea of me just sending it to a journal that isn't accessible to the public is it's very problematic. So the only thing that I can do is to share it in some sort of visual format. And yes, there are infographics, there are just little slide decks and different things that I use, but I'm not sure which ones work better. And to be honest, if I had more time, I would actually go for it. I would, turn my entire project into something that is I would turn it into a game, cards, resources that can be used. I've done a little bit in the past, but I would really push it. But I just don't have the time. Maybe one day I'll have a team and we'll just experiment with with things like that. Because to me, that's where the value is in science, right?
Have you seen rewards in academia that incentivize that sort of thing? I mean, it seems like you're putting a lot of time and energy into it, and you say you want to commit even more time if you had that possibility. What do you see as the major reward systems, personally or?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, I think it's important to clarify that I really, really enjoy it. Playing around with graphics. Sometimes it might be my procrastination strategy, just to turn it into something fun. But because I'm also involved in some creative work on the side, it's really good for my soul. So it doesn't feel like an extra work. But I do realize sometimes that I spend too much time doing it. But saying that, I feel that one of the things that I actually benefit from is the Twitter community. So because I was sharing research in a certain way, and I think that's also how you kind of found out about my work, because you might have seen some colorful slides or, and so that's how I benefited from it. So networks and, meeting people, but in terms of, references and the real value that I should be getting to get a tenure somewhere, I don't think that's valuable. And to be honest, I'm also thinking about my role in academia now. I think everybody has these thoughts after lockdown, what are you going to do with your life? And I guess I'm there as well, thinking if academia is really the place for me, or maybe a different type of research. So I'm definitely there just now, because I, as much as I love writing and I do like writing academic papers, I just struggle sometimes to see the value of it, if it's locked somewhere in the cloud. And so yeah, definitely it is helping me in terms of my reputation and social media presence, but I really don't know if it's actually having any impact on my academic career.
I can't possibly tell you how much that resonates with me, especially at this point in my career, how strongly your words kind of affect me. Because I see this exact same issue, not only in my experience, but in the experience of senior and junior academics that become, maybe disillusioned is too strong a word, but certainly looking more critically at the institution of academia and asking ourselves, are the incentives in place for us to use this knowledge to its most effective, to borrow your word, impact? And I've come out of that reflection feeling less and less secure about the what I used to perceive academia as being kind of this beacon of objective truth and this ivory tower of these learned scholars, and we should all be kind of looking to them as and I'm not questioning the value of science. What I'm questioning here is the institution of academia, and I think that's where your kind of your mindset might be. So I want to challenge you now to think maybe in your own life or in if you were to give advice to others, somebody entering academia, maybe somebody who's just finished their master's and considering a PhD, or who's just finished their PhD and now looking at this landscape of employment opportunities, what would you tell them? What kind of wisdom?
I don't feel like I have any wisdom in that regard, because, my experience has been just, moving from one project to another and actually stressing about the next job halfway through my job. And so it's like a constant struggle. And, I think it's interesting how someone can be perceived as a successful academic, or someone who, is secure in their position, or, but I don't feel like that. And saying that, I do enjoy changing projects. I don't think I would be happy in one position for a number of years unless this position would give me a flexibility to play around with different projects. But I don't think I have that much of wisdom, apart from the fact that there is this big issue in academia when it comes. Two feelings come to mind, and that's shame and guilt. So maybe when being in academia and doing the PhD work that you decide to do, or I think something that I've been trying to acknowledge and deal with is this idea of shame and guilt, of not being enough, not doing enough, and it's it's a journey, it's hard work. And I obviously tend to overwork myself because that's my personality. But I guess when it comes to the job market, it's so difficult. And I guess that's part of the reason why I don't know if I want to be in this position, although I do know that I have so much to offer. I do know that, when I was a lecturer, I really enjoyed it. I wanted to ensure that these lectures are interactive, and I really enjoy most of the work that I do. But I do question it sometimes. Where will this moment be where I will actually have to have a secure job? So what wisdom would I share? Yeah, I don't want to sound patronizing, like being brave and going for it, and because I know it's not the case for everybody. But I guess for me, it was definitely the louder I became, the easier it was for me. So going to conferences, being loud online, and actually putting things out there that often didn't make me like super comfortable. So actually taking those risks, and but I know that this is not for everybody, to do that. So perhaps having self-compassion, and at every level, PhD, postdoc, I guess that's a big one.
But I think there's so much wisdom in your truth. And I think that's what I really find remarkable about what you've just said, even though you started by saying, I don't know how much wisdom I've accrued, but you went immediately into your own truth, and that truth is valid. And I think so many other academics experience the same issues around job insecurity, especially, I think is hugely problematic about academia in general. Living with that insecurity, living with that shame and guilt, and finding ways of coping with these issues. Could you give me maybe your top 3 exercises for self-compassion, or for just dealing with the day-to-day of that academic mindset of shame and guilt and coping?
Mm-hmm. Well, like I said, I'm a workaholic, and I often struggle with, having a clear strategy in place, because my work has always defined me. I've always been either, the activist, the practitioner, digital youth worker, now the academic, academic/practitioner. So I've always felt like that defines me, and I have to do it right, But I guess one of the things that helped me through the lockdown and now is actually thinking about my identity beyond that, So what can I do to create another identity for myself, an identity that will make me happy and that will create this space where I feel safe and where I actually feel that I could be more of myself and kind of push it, become more radical. So I kind of, I'm making art, and this art is very personal sometimes, which is also an issue for me because, who's going to take my work seriously as an academic if they see my art? But it is around menstrual justice. It is about invisible disability. So I guess this, knowing that I have this other identity kind of helps me, and I can go there and work with that. So perhaps not just seeing yourself entirely as an academic and that this is who you are and this is what your value is, actually thinking about other things that you bring to the world. And I know people have different roles. People are parents. I'm not a parent, so I don't really have that other role. So I guess so the self-care. I don't know. One of the things that someone once told me is that thinking time is extremely important. So even if it's going for a walk or working from some other location where you not necessarily are sitting at your desk. In terms of, this is what real work looks like. So I guess acknowledging that this isn't always the case, work could be really so many different things. And I would struggle to have an office and work from 9 to 5. For me, it kind of happens naturally in different places. So that's good for me, moving about and actually not being defined to my one chair, one desk, and the third one, I'm not sure if I've got a third one, but yeah, I don't know if I have a third one.
That's okay. The two that you've given are enough for. They're incredibly valuable. So I think I would like to end the interview on this note because you've given us something to think about and to consider and how we can integrate these approaches in our everyday life, whether you're an academic or not. But I want to give you just one last chance is there anything else you'd like to add that you think is important for young academics, academics in their mid-career, academics at the end of their career? What should people be thinking about when they're approaching some of the topics and issues that you deal with on an everyday?
Do you mean in terms of participatory work or just in general? Yeah, I think because my work is really related to evaluation and impact, and I see that there's lots of assumptions there, and these are not assumptions that are not only your assumptions, but it's assumptions that you internalize because they're imposed on you. So I think maybe thinking about that when you're delivering your work, when you are designing a project, and just, I guess, remembering about the limits of participation. And I would reverse that, and I would actually start with the limitations and then go into participation, because it seems to me that there is so many issues around it, and actually starting with the limitations and actually deciding if the participatory approach is really the thing you should be doing, because that's the project that I'm doing just now at the United Nations University. I was also trying to turn it into something participatory. I use the word co-creation, but I don't think it's going to be that, So now that I'm in the third stage of my data collection, I don't want to become the victim of my own research in the sense that I criticize it, but then I do it myself. So, so I guess, whatever feels right with your values, and maybe knowing what your values are in the first place. So, but again, I don't feel like I'm in the position to tell people what to do. And so this is just some ideas, but they're in no way the best ideas. And I know there are people out there who have more experience and who could share better tips and knowledge.
I appreciate you saying that. I find so much value in your experience, and so much of what you said today resonates with my journey and with the journey I see that my students are on and my colleagues and peers. So I want to thank you sincerely, Alicja, for taking the time to talk to me. I always say that our time is the most scarce and valuable resource, and you taking an hour to dedicate to having this conversation with me and the people who listen to my podcast, it's really meaningful. So
Well, thank you so much for having me. And, conversations like these are extremely useful, that to take a moment and think about your practice and your work. So it's been an honor. And again, thank you for inviting me.